Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to NIFU, and welcome to NIFU's breakfast or morning seminar, where we will have some very interesting presentations that will both provide some new informations and perspectives related to the incredible growth in scientific publishing that has taken place worldwide in the last 10-20 years. For the record, this seminar is being recorded. It will be posted on our webpage, but you have nothing to worry about because no one in the audience will be filmed. Just wanted to inform you about this. Okay, so the background is this. If you do 20 years of development of scientific publications, there has been an incredible growth in the volume of what is being published. Now, in 2022, on a global basis, there were 3.6 times as many publications as it was 20 years ago. But this development, or this growth, has been very different from country to country. In this period, Norway's growth is not even shown, because Norway's numbers are so small compared to those of the United States and China that I skipped this. But in 2022, Norway produced almost 5 times as many publications as we did 20 years ago. That is a very strong growth, but it is of course nothing compared to that of China. China has increased by 21.9 times in this period, and if you compare that to that of United States, which is 1.88 times, there's something happening globally in terms of who's doing research and who is really putting an effort into growing as a science nation. So, more papers, that's a good thing, right? Because science is good, so more science is a good thing. However, is this always a good thing? Now, the two presenters here today, they're not going to answer a definite yes or no to this question, but they will offer some very interesting perspectives that can help us to understand more about what's happening and how it happens. So, not to waste any more time, we have a very packed program today. We have lots of things that we want to go through. The two main presenters today is my NIFU colleague, research professor Dag Aksnes, who will give the presentation about open access publishing and its impact on the publishing patterns in low-income countries. Then we have invited Professor Marco Seeber from University of Agder, who will speak about the evolution of the business models in scientific publishing and possible implications of this. So, first presenter, Dag Aksnes, please join me.
The topic for my presentation is low-income countries, but I will start by showing a figure of the tremendous change in the publication system that has taken place, and this is Norway. So during this period of 10 years, a lot of almost 84% of the publications are now freely available. So this, compared to 10 years ago, the figure was 38%. So that means that during just 10 years, there has been this really large change. And if you're not familiar with the colors, this is the explanation to the right. The gold journals are journals where you have to pay an APC to get published, but then the article is freely available. Diamond journals are journals where you don't have to pay and there is no subscription cost, indeed. And then we have hybrid journals where which are both subscription based but you can also pay an APC to get your article freely available. And many universities and some research institutes, they have a hybrid agreement called publish and read agreements. That means that you are allowed to publish there for free based on this agreement. If we look at the absolute figures, the column to the right is the close. So as you can see, there has been a very strong reduction. And if this development continues, I think almost all publication will be freely available and can be read for anyone. And the strongest growth has been for the gold journals, where you have to pay APC to get published. But the topic of this study is low-income countries. When the OA movement started more than 20 years ago, we had a basic idea was that this could be particularly beneficial for researchers in low-income countries. And this is to the right, you see the declaration for the Budapest, to share the learning of the rich with the poor and the poor with the rich. So that was a fundamental idea for why it's necessary to have the research findings openly available. So in this research project we have analyzed to what extent is this actually the case. And we think that it's reasonable to think that the OA has been particularly beneficial to these countries where access to literature was originally very poor due to high subscription costs. And this is particularly the case in Africa. So in this study we have analyzing research from a consumer perspective. That means that the literature you need in order to do further research. So we have looked at the reference list of the publication, as you can see to the right there, and identify which of these references are openly available and which are not, which are green and which are... And so this is the basic methodological approach. So we think that's reasonable to find that a researcher from lower income countries to a larger extent rely on literature that is openly available compared to other. So we have done a really big scale studies analyzing 1.3 billion references from 42 million articles to analyze this issue. And to classify the countries, we have used the World Bank classification of countries and income level. So this is the 4 categories for high income and 2 for lower income, no, middle income, and 1 for lower income. So when we classify the countries using this categories, we find that researchers from lower income countries, they tend to refer to much fewer previous studies when they write, and this has been the case the entire 40-year period we have analyzed here. But the gap is reduced, so that means that they are catching up with the high income countries in terms of reference. And we also find that there is a development towards the cite more recent studies. In the past, there was a gap that researchers from lower income countries more tended to rely on older studies. But this gap has been reduced. There is a development for upper middle countries which is not where there's an opposite trend. But when we look at the references that are available openly, we find that the table to the growth show that for low-income countries we have much stronger increase in the publications that are available openly. Compared, that is 42%, and for high-income countries it's 18%. And for the middle-income countries, they are positioned somewhere in the between. So this means that we find some evidence that the rise in OA has been particularly beneficial for researchers in low-income countries, as it seems that they have been able to make benefit from this change in the publication system. So in this way one can say that fundamental objective as well as justification of this change in publishing system has been accomplished. But still we think that the differences, as you see in the figure, is not that large as one might think. And one reason is that Yes. So these are some reasons why we think this might be the case, that researchers still from low-income countries are still facing the same situation as other researchers when they are collecting literature, and also that what is in the data material, there are still some of the publications which appear as closed are still available through other websites such as ResearchGate. So this means that what appears as closed might still be openly available. What is this? Kristen. This is bad artificial intelligence. We'll try to solve it for the next presenter. Yes, but new challenges has arisen, and while this transformation may have solved one problem, it has created a new one, and that is that a new problem has emerged, that researchers in low-income countries may not be available to pay the APCs for publishing in gold journals, and that is a recent article by Nils Stenseth put attention to that problem, and that although there are waivers available for researchers in low-income countries, there is a problem of finding funding. For often you have to pay maybe $3,000 for, and that is a lot of money for researchers in these countries. So that was the background for this study. So, and now I think we will return to the next presentation. And I think this is some kind of translation.
Yeah. Okay, let's hope this disappears when we change PowerPoint here. Okay, so anyway, most of Dag's presentation, except for the last slide, had a rather positive message, right? Which meaning that people who in the past was unable to get access to all the literature they wanted now increasingly has so. But, and I think Marco will add something after the but. It may not be all positive. So, Marco Seeber from Agder University, thank you for coming to Oslo to present here at NIFU. Very different presentation than what you've heard from Dag. They're both about the same thing in some way, and you will shed some very interesting perspective in the growth of scientific publishing, and not least how the growth has happened. Okay, so Marco, now it's for you, and hopefully without the translation below. Great.
Okay, thank you everybody for thank you Frederick and NIFU for the invitation. So it's a long presentation with much content, so I go straight away. In this presentation, I will basically talk about the 3 last decades and the changes in the business model in academic publishing and some of its consequences. So one thing that we need to be reminded before really digging into the content is that we have some major types of combination and configuration in academic publishing, depending on who owns the journal, the scientific journal, and who actually published the scientific journals. And we have 4 typologies of actors that may play both roles or just one of them. And they are learned societies, so associations of scientific communities and disciplines, for-profit publisher, non-profit publisher, and university press or universities. And again, we can see that there are different combinations. Most of the times you have a for-profit publisher which also owns the journals, or a learned society that plays both roles. But there are different combinations. In this presentation, I will mostly, but not exclusively, talk about this part, which is when the publisher is for-profit. And reviewing the literature identified try to identify 4 major phases in the recent history of academic publishing. The first is what we could call print era. The second is a concentration phase. Then we have an open access phase, which started around the beginning of this century, 2005 approximately, which is still rising and running. And finally, what I would call a diversification phase, where many things are happening actually in the last 7-8 years. Let's start with the print era, which we could say arrived until mid-90s. So the print era of printed journal is not over yet completely, because we still have most of the journal which have a printed version. But in the print era, we actually had all the major phases in the publishing and peer review process which involved something printed. Back in time, actually submissions and reviews were made by sending by mail, not email, a printed manuscript. And the same was when you were inviting somebody to review, you would send a manuscript, printed manuscript. So of course, these imply a rather slow, heavy system, but also, what I write, thoughtful. Meaning, if you have to submit a paper, you will think twice before identifying and choosing a journal, and when identifying a reviewer, you will think twice, and a reviewer not accepting to review will think twice, okay? Now it's much faster. In this area, we had a fragmented market, meaning that the big 5 for-profit publisher controlled around 20% of the market. There were a lot of many small publishers. And the business model, this is the first time I mentioned the business model, consisted in the so-called subscription-based business model, which means revenues derived from subscription fees of mostly public libraries buying the right to access and read the manuscript for their members. Let's move to the second phase, which started around mid-90s until mid-zeros. So in this picture, we can see the number of journals' new acquisitions over time. There has been since the 60s a process of very, very slow concentration of the market. But it peaked in this period. And you can see from the color of the histograms that most of the journals consisted of moving from small to big publisher, which is the red color. So we see a huge wave of concentration and moving of journals in this period. We can also see this from this picture. Well, in the red line, we have the market share of all the publishers except the big 6, or it's actually the big 5, the for-profit, but it includes in this case the American Chemical Society. So we can see that basically in a snapshot of time between the mid-90s and mid-20s, I don't know how to say that, the market share of the largest publisher moved from 20 to more than 50% of the market. And nowadays, the 5 big for-profit publishers control 50% of the market. So again, this process was running already for a long period of time, but digitalization strongly accelerated this process. So in this phase, we can characterize the academic publishing, scientific publishing phase with digitalization. So it's a relatively quick move away from paper in most of the stages of the publishing and peer review process. The emergence of an oligopoly with the big 5 controlling over 50% of the market. But the business model is still basically subscription based. So they still get the revenues mostly from subscription fees and very expensive fees from the libraries. Let's move to the third phase. So digitalization contributed to a virtuous cycle for the largest for-profit publisher. it was difficult for some of the small publishers to move to a digital area. For today, it seems obvious to open a journal online, but back in the 90s, it might not be that obvious. And also, with digitalization, you have zero marginal cost of reproduction, which means that large publisher can offer at a lower price a large amount of publication, and this gives them a competitive advantage, which increases their profit, they invest in acquisitions, and so forth. So we have this process of concentration. We can see in this picture Elsevier operating profit and margins for the scientific, technical, and medical division in a period of 20 years approximately. So this sector has always been extremely profitable if we look at the profit margins. But what changes in this period is also the absolute profit, the operating profits, which kicked up in around the 2000s and reaches billions only for Elsevier's. So one may wonder, why is this industry so profitable? This is often debated. Well, let me draw a parallel with normal journals. If we take a normal journals, we typically have an owner, an editor, which pays for the salary of its staff, journals, directors, and other staff, which produce the content. Then the journal arrives in the market, it competes with other journals, and gets revenues from the readers. Let's compare these with academic journals. In academic journals, we have typically citizens paying taxes to the state. The state pays the salary of the scientist. The scientists write the articles. They play the role of the editors, and they also reviewers. And this produces basically the journal. The state also pays for public libraries, which pay heavy fees to the publisher, and the publisher also gets some revenues from individuals that are not linked to a library and pay to access a specific article. As we can see from this picture, all roads lead to Rome in this situation. All the flows lead to the same subject, basically. And many journals actually enjoy a semi-monopolistic position because there is not perfect competition between journals. Typically, you have many niches in science, and journals try to occupy a specific niche. So myself, Frederick, when we choose for a journals, we cannot choose among 20, 30 journals. There is 3, 4, 5 journals. So this gave them a kind of semi-monopolistic position, which you can exploit typically for profits. So, of course, as the profits increased in this industry, there was also a movement 20 years ago of librarians complaining about the raising cost for public libraries and opposing to the merge. They didn't succeed, as we've seen in the picture before. The concentration happened. So, digitalization, both directly by providing a new technology and indirectly by spurring some concerns and unhappiness with the situation, so some political force that lead to the emergence of an open access movement at the beginning of the 2000s. What was the goal of the open access movement, as Dag explained it before? To basically reduce the barriers to knowledge in the internet era by enabling free access to scientific publication. And the defining moment which put really open access on the agenda was at the Budapest Open Access Initiative at the Open Society Institute with the declaration for the use of digital tools such as Open Archives and Open Access Journal free of charge for the reader. But, again, as Dag discussed before, open access is actually one term that hides very, very different systems. let's consider 4 characteristics, whether the authors retain the copyrights, whether it's free for authors, whether it's free for readers, and whether it's peer-reviewed. If we combine these characteristics, we can identify the different arrangements that exist today. For example, subscription-based business model occupy this space. It is free for authors, it is peer-reviewed, but it's not free for the readers. Then we have preprints, which are free for both, but they are not peer-reviewed. We have a green open access space, which consists of self-archiving through personal web pages or public repositories of often articles which have been already accepted. And finally, we have what we call gold open access, which imply the so-called article processing charge business model. And I'm going to focus now specifically on these. So the gold open access implies that the authors, to publish, pay a fee. And these fees supposedly cover the cost of publication and some profit of the publisher. Now, the number of journals open access, gold open access registered exploded, as we can see from this slide. But gold open access also in this case, it's a term that covers different situations. We have non-profit open access, which include Plus One, very famous and big journal. For-profit open access, for example, MDPI and Frontiers. And in both situations, these receive all the revenues from the APCs. So it's exclusively APC model. But then we also have traditional for-profits and learned societies that simultaneously get revenues through the APC business model and the traditional subscription fees. And if they get both at the same time, we have the so-called hybrid model, which is very popular, and the so-called problem of double dipping, meaning that for the same article, the state pays, the public pays twice. They paid for publishing and for reading at the same time. So we have now a very heterogeneous configuration of gold open access. So in this picture, unfortunately, is a little bit small, but we have the cost of the APC running from 4,000 to 1,000 in this area. Their scientific impact normalized. Then we have the each dots is a publisher, and gray means hybrid, and gold means full open access. So we have a different price level and some relationship with the impact. Now let me make an interlude now. And I want to compare the two main business models in scientific publishing existing nowadays. So the traditional, subscription-based, and the emergent article processing charge business model. So let me reflect on some key logical connection. In the subscription-based model, the revenues, again, come from subscription fees of public libraries. Who is the client in this model? The client is the reader. Because we subscribe a journal, we buy a journal because we think that the content is of good quality. I will not subscribe a journal that I believe it's not good quality, right? So in this system, the client is the reader, and the goal is to read good stuff. I subscribe a journal if I can read good things. The publisher goal is, of course, profit. We are analyzing for profit publisher, and they can get profit with more subscription, high fees and stuff. And you can get this by pursuing quality in the material that you publish. The key role in managing the journal, the editor, they are typically scientists. What is important for scientists is prestige and reputation. And they can achieve this by publishing high quality content. So in this system we have, in principle, an alignment of the incentives and motivation of the three main actors: client, editor, and publisher. To quality. So they have a common interest in a rigorous selective peer review process. Let's move to the article processing charge business model, so-called open access. But we have seen that open access hides a lot of complexity. The revenues. The revenues comes from authors who publish articles. So who is the client? The client, obviously, in this model is the author. Look also web pages, compare a gold open access website, compare a traditional subscription based, they look differently. The position of the client is different. The content is different. The authors, we know, have a strong pressure to publish. Nowadays, publish or perish squared. The publisher profit, again, derives from authors publishing articles. So, of course, we observed a huge increase in the quantity of the article published and the growth of APC publisher. Let me show you a picture which was developed by Gunnar Sivertsen. Evolution in the largest scientific journal in the world between 2010 and 2022. This is the situation in 2010. They are all subscription based except PLOS ONE, which is a non-profit open access. How it would look like 10 years after? It looks like this. They are all open access for profit. And look at the numbers. Here the biggest one was 6,000, and then it's 20,000, 17,000, 17,000, and so on. 21 are open access for profit. 13 MDPI, 6 Frontiers, 2 Nature Springer. We can see also from this picture, which focus on publishers, well, everyone grows, but there are exceptions. Some, especially the open access, APC publisher exploded. Take MDPI in 7 years from 17,000 to almost 300,000 revenues from 14 to 300 million Swiss francs. Also, the traditional publisher actually start to like this business model. So gold open access, it's actually becoming the strongest way. The majority of articles recently became gold open access, not hybrid, not closed anymore. So very popular, started to be very popular also among traditional publishers. Again, in a paper from Gunnar and colleague, they comment in 2020 the annual revenues from APC among major scholarly journals publishers exceeded $2 billion dollars, and publishers find actually APC even more profitable business model than subscription based. So journals are chosen to a lesser extent based on quality consideration. So what are some risks of the APC model? Well, we have publisher profits, which derives from authors publishing articles. So a clear goal to quantity. The journal editors, as we've seen, it's scientists, and scientists care for prestige and therefore for quality of the material they select and selectivity. There is a problem. There is a clash of goals, quantity versus selectivity. So what happens in APC journals? The editors tend to be either less experienced academics or not academics anymore. You don't need them. They are actually an obstacle in this situation. So peer review becomes really a ficus leaf, to the point that actually, if you look, most of the cases, publications are special issues. This is a picture which presents the number of special issues a year at NDPI. We have some of their journals which publish 3,000 special issues every year. Thousands of special issues every year. And you can see the evolution. This is 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and this is 5 years later. This is another picture. We see red dots means 800 articles with special issues, and blue is normal submissions. Again, we see a clear difference between for-profit, full for-profit open access, and the others. The only exception is BMC, which is for-profit open access, but it's controlled by Springer, so it's not exclusively based on that business model. So it's fantastic. You catch two birds with one stone. You don't do peer review because it's guest editor that will do the peer review of the special issue, and you publish a lot. Let's look also days from submission. This is also a huge difference between traditional publisher and the others. We have a non-profit +1, long peer review process, some have experienced, but it's non-profit. Then we have the hybrid, approximately 150 days from submission to publication. And then we have the for-profit open access, with MDPI an average of 37 days from submission to publications. Rejection rates, interesting, around 80%, 75%, so one chance on 4 or 5 publications to be published, with the exception of MDPI, which is around 50%, much lower. So, in a recent editorial I wrote with my colleagues that actually APC fits what Christensen defined disruptive innovation. So this is a terminology of this scholar studying disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is, for example, digital cameras. What characterizes disruptive innovation? They are innovation that make it much simpler and affordable to own and use a product for people who historically didn't have the skills or the money to be in the market. In this case, people that were not skilled enough to publish in the traditional model now can, much easier, very quick, faster, much faster, by paying. And another characteristics that share with the concept of disruptive innovation is that they typically start in marginal market segment. So the dominant organization at the beginning don't even realize that something is happening. But then, they catch up, as we have seen sometimes, if it's not too late. But they did. So this open access, full open access grew incredibly fast. At some point, the traditional publisher says, maybe we need to do something, we can copy this business model. And this is where we are now. Okay, so last phase is what I would call diversification, because we see several things going on at the same time. First, subscription-based model guaranteed a stable source of revenues, regardless of the publishing volume. You are subscribed, it doesn't matter, whether you publish more or less. But if you think on the APC model, this is very different. APC model requires that you constantly publish because you gain profit once, forever, only at the moment you publish. After that, you don't get a stable revenue. You can have published 1 million articles, but it doesn't matter. If you don't publish today, you don't get revenues anymore. So this is in a way a strong pressure on these publishers. They need to constantly publish and increase publishing if they want to grow. And the same applies to traditional publishers, which have been a bit moving in this direction. And so we have instances of publisher making pressure on editors to lower the selectivity and increase the publication volumes. I can share some anecdotal evidence, but you probably have this experience. Editors receive this kind of pressure sometimes, not always, luckily. For example, Wiley, Elsevier came under scrutiny for similar situations. They were pressing editors to publish more, despite editors' rising concern about quality. And some of these editorial boards resigned and founded a new journal. So what we see is that journal editorial teams respond in different ways to these publication pressures. For example, so we have a diversification of publication practices among traditional hybrid journals. And I made some analysis on the business and management journal, for example. If we take the top journals, most of them, their size, their number of publication remained stable over time. But some top journals' size exploded very, very fast. For example, here we have from 2017 to 2021. The blue histograms is the top 15 on Web of Science journal in management, and the number of articles they publish, we can see it's kind of stable. But if we take the just 16, 17, 18, and 19 in the rank, they grew from 700 to more than 2,500 in just few years. So we see also diversification of editorial boards responding to these dynamics in a different way. Another phenomenon is the growth of illegitimate businesses. We are all aware of the label predatory journals, which also share an open access APC business model, even more extreme, so they are classified as predatory. Then the definition change is debated. Some lists mention also a big publisher in this group. And another phenomenon related to the explosion of quantity is paper mills, which is a term new to many. Paper mills is basically companies, mostly in some large developing countries, that develop articles, fake articles, they submit to journal, and once the paper is in advanced to publication, they sell the authorship, for example, with Telegram channels and so on. And we might think that this is really a niche. Living in Norway, working in Norway, it might be a very marginal problem. So it's interesting to look at the study done recently by some renowned scientists. They estimated that among 1.3 million biomedical Shimago listed, so it's Scopus, publications, they estimated approximately 300,000 of fake publications in biomedicine. So the countries, and we have some countries with highest proportions of these paper mills, around 40% of their publication in this sample, 50% are suspiciously the output of a paper mill. Another phenomenon is the diversification of the sources of revenues by selling data, tools, and services. If you know somebody working for the library system in a university, they invest quite a lot of money in these kind of tools. And we work in these institutions, sometimes we are not even aware. To the extent that the revenues of Elsevier in 2022 came 50% from publication, but 40% from databases and tools. So it's already a very important business. Everything is moving extremely quickly in this market. Final important trend, which might deserve a separate section, is the so-called transformative agreement. Maybe no new for many of you. What is a transformative agreement? Well, I mentioned that there are two main problems in academic publishing. Rising subscription fees to read the scholarly literature and rising APC fees to publish in the scholarly literature. Last slide also of Dag. So transformative agreement emerged to tackle these two problems. The leading figure in this process was the Max Planck Society. In 2015, they wrote a report in which they declare the money already invested in the research publishing system is sufficient to enable a transformation to open access publishing. So they made a proposal to replace subscription fees with agreements for fully open access publishing. So we already publish fees, subscription fees. We make these subscription fees not for reading, but for both reading and publishing. So a transformative agreement is an agreement typically between a consortia of institutions from a country and the publisher to buy a large amount of APC discounts or waivers for a certain number of articles in hybrid or open journals. The supporters of this initiative were again ISAC, which is an initiative coordinated by Max Planck Library, and Coalition S, which is a consortium of national research agencies and founders from 12 European countries promoting open access publishing. Was it successful? Extremely successful, especially in Europe. This is the number of publications. In just a few years, it reached on 260,000 publications under a transformative agreement. So it's really 10% of the global production. And it's especially successful in some European countries and Nordic countries. So this is Norway. The majority of articles are already under a transformative agreement. And we have many other European countries, much less in other parts of the globe. Does it work? Well, it's maybe too early. I found a very recent report to the US Congress on financial mechanism for open access publishing of federally funded research. It's November 2023, so it's really recent. They write, there is little evidence that TAs are truly containing the cost. In one way, they accept and strengthen the current costly and opaque market for journal subscriptions. Coalition S, actually, one of the main supporters from the beginning, Coalition S, announced the end of its support for transformative agreement beyond 2024. Concerned that sustained support would make this agreement a permanent feature. Other critical comments, that's why I mentioned maybe it's an old wine in a new bottle. Risk of replicating the same trends and distortion that it was designed to alleviate. First, given the time and effort that you need to negotiate these agreements, they tend to favor large publisher and push small partner to go on the same wagon. Small peripheral institutions countries may find difficult to negotiate. You don't have much bargaining power. And authors are pushed to publish in journals covered by these agreements. Increasing concentration. I have an anecdote of a colleague in Ireland which was asking, hey, I'm going to publish this article. Do you have some support for open access? They ask it to the library and they reply, no, if you want, you go in this journal which is covered by the agreement. Why we should waste money for for APC in the other journals? So you see these working. Okay, last 3 minutes for some final consideration. Some challenges and possible solution for preserving quality and ethical standards. First, finally, authorities like funding agencies are understanding that open access is not the same. You have a variety of solutions, and what we need is diamond or green open access. So what they are requiring, it's not in some cases open access per se, but green open access and diamond open access as a precondition. Otherwise, we have been spending a lot of money, part of the budget, to pay gold open access, which is kind of a paradox. We have to recognize that there are some open access initiatives very established, working sufficiently well in South and Latin America. So we need to maybe have a look. For example, Shello and Redalic, they are networks of journals already operating for quite a lot of time. Probably we need, especially we scientometricians, bibliometricians, take a close look to journal practices. For example, in recent journals discovered that editors publish a lot in their own journals, in the journals they are editors. Is this something we desirable, or we need to check? There are many aspects that we might look to monitor the quality of a journal. For example, do we observe a massive growth happening very quickly? Is there a high share of self-citations or citations from journals from other sectors? Do we see a lot of citations from journals of dubious reputation, or publication from countries hosting paper mills, or serial authors that publish constantly in the same journals, and so forth? I mean, if we sit around the table, we can find many examples of things that we might try to monitor. I'm an editor, co-editor of a journal. What we did recently is to venture into a pilot of transparent peer review, which means we publish anonymous peer review report of published articles. The logic is that this helps to reveal the quality of the peer review, that we abide to some standards for all our publications. It is much more difficult to do it for a predatory journal. You cannot publish probably the peer review report in such journals. It's a way to signal reputation and to enable research on peer review. Final consideration, and then I'm closing. Scientists are under pressure to publish quantity. In this system, especially in some countries, there are strong incentives to cut the corners, to maybe adopt opportunistic behavior, which erodes trust in the scientific literature and in science. We have observed a worrisome growth of scientific retractions and scandals. This is a comment by Oransky, which is the founder of Retraction Watch. When we launched Retraction Watch in 2010, journals were averaging 45 retraction a month. Last year, nearly 300 a month. So what could be some important measures? I believe it's tenure goals and promotion procedures that preserve quality over simply quantity, and metrics, with a close assessment of the most important publication. And in this respect, I think that Norway have a very good model in many regards. The process that is adopted for promotion in the academic system is considering a selected number of publications in depth. So this could be a very important measure.
Okay, thanks a lot, Marco. Very interesting and also a bit concerning, some of the things that you talked about today. Now, after these two presentations, I think we're going to do some questions at the end of this seminar, because we have two comments now. First, I'd like to give the word to my colleague Gunnar Sivertsen, sitting there, to give some reflections about what you have been listening to today.
Okay, I'll try to be short and go directly to policy. First start with Norway. So there is a new report coming out and launched next week, isn't it? On what day? Which day is it next week?
Thursday next week.
Thursday next week. The report is called Strategy for Scientific Publishing After 2024. And it responds to the long-term plan of research, where the government states that the directorates of the government under the Ministry of Education and Research should support the institutions in developing this strategy. Now that is a change, because back in 2018, when we joined Plan S from Norway's side, these same directorates, which is SICT and HKD now, and the Research Council, which has been acting as a directorate in this area, were the movers of the campaign that the ministry started to go towards open access. But in this new report, where there's also the influence of the researchers through Universities Norway and FFA, the institutes, the message is a bit different from what it was in 2018. They state a vision of open access publishing that is combined with reasonable costs and good research quality. So they bring into 2 other criteria for judging whether this process has been successful or not. Up to now, it's only been the degree, the percentage of open access, which should, according to the plan of the government, go up to 100% before next year. And now we're in December 2023. This new report, which will be launched next week, also has an overview of the experiences. And they point out that neither, according to the criteria about costs, nor the criteria about research quality, the development so far has been successful. Instead, it looks worrying. I don't know whether this report will have any statement next week about a warning to the government of perhaps stop campaigning and start learning, and whether they will advise another deadline than in three weeks for completing 100% open access. I wish for a situation where we stop using metaphors and start being realistic, which means that we don't call it paywall, we call it subscriptions. Subscription is an ordinary economic contract that functions everywhere else in society. So if we want to go to the opera house, which is highly subsidized, we also have to pay a little to show our interest. And that might increase the quality of what's going on there. I know that in public libraries, there's no fees. They're all open. They've been so for centuries. But research libraries and research communication is specialized. And we need to ask again, was subscriptions as a funding model so bad after all? Of course, the industry has made lots of profits. Perhaps that was the main problem that we tried to solve. I think we also should stop talking about gold and diamond. We should talk about what it really means. We should invite specialists in law and specialists in business to advise us further, because the advisors so far have not come from expertise in economics and law. They would say that instead of calling things gold, you should say it's payment by the readers, as Marco showed. Instead of calling things diamond, you should say these are fully subsidized, publicly subsidized, highly competent organizations that have some costs. So what is the implication of moving the whole subsidizing into the public sector? And what do we then do about the private business out there? I think we should start studying these questions, and the government should stop campaigning and learning from experience. That's my input to the discussion. I also read this new Plan S document, and it doesn't really reflect on experiences either. It reinforces the trend. So you want to do something about the industry and the market for scientific publishing, and then you turn to the researchers and say, you should do this and that. So they have not been successful, like you said about the transformative agreements. They have not been transformative. They have just been profit-making. They are not summing up experience about this. They are, even more than before, saying to the research communities, you should do this and that, you should do open peer review, you should. So this trend towards instructing science continues, while we so far haven't solved the problems in the market. Okay, that's just an input for your discussion.
Okay, so we heard next week there's a report being launched, and here we have one of the persons who are involved in this work.
Only one.
We are several here today,
Several.
possibly, yes, but only one up here.
Yeah.
So, Espen Sandøe Karlsen from the Research Council of Norway, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for the very excellent presentations, and to Gunnar for already introducing the work that is coming up. So my initial take here was by reading the first article on the low-income countries, and sort of a general comment to that, because I don't think it should come as a huge surprise that sort of available research is more used than unavailable research, and that's perhaps extra useful for when looking at lower income countries, but also looking at institutions outside sort of academic circles, like the Research Council of Norway. We don't have any access to articles behind or that are through subscriptions. And we often face the problem of trying to access articles behind paywalls. So I want to first of all also applaud the authors there for making the article available on a preprint server, which is really nice. I was able to read it. And sort of the perspective that goes to the heart of sort of one of the driving forces behind the open access debates, sort of the general idea of the research dissemination, which a long time ago the sociologist of science Robert Merton called the normative structure of science, is still very much in place. And one aspect of this is that the research results is a common good and should have a common ownership. And so researchers give up the right to the intellectual property to serve the research community and society in general. And if certain parts, sectors, countries, etc. are systematically excluded from entering, then everybody loses out. So, well, not surprising, I thought it's very useful to have data that shows that sort of these norms work, and that actually available research is more used than unavailable. And that, of course, the benefits of this is much larger than only sort of what the citations show, because much of the use is obviously, or citations is one use, but there are many others. Education and health, private sector, public sector policy, and so forth. And also one could perhaps guess that papers are written, particularly in low-income countries, in journals that are perhaps not indexed in the databases used. So, and also the barriers, as has been shown now, is sort of in an open access economy is one of publishing rather than of reading, which brings us to the discussion about the sort of economy or the business model of the system. And of course, as Research Council, I will now go a little bit back to where we stand here. And we are working to sort of change the publication system in several ways. And one way we can look at this sort of perhaps from a supply and demand side. So on one side, you can try to reform how you evaluate research and publications in order not to solely incentivize quantity. So, for instance, the Research Council of Norway has signed both the agreement on reforming research assessment and joining the NORCAM network, which work on these issues, also on looking at different ways of evaluating different outputs of research. And also, I should say that when applications are assessed at the Research Council, we ask them to look at the relevant articles, not the numbers, the impact factors, and so forth. And of course, this as well, which Gunnar mentioned, as you know, the Research Council has been part of Coalition S since 2018, and a lot has happened since then. And this, there is, and also widespread recognition that the APC model is, as it exists today, is not sustainable. And the most recent development is this, which I'm not quite sure I agree that it's sort of a directive. It's an invitation to discuss it. So this is not a policy out there now. This is what you should do. This is a vision set out, and one is asking for research community feedback, which is in the process right now. But of course, the idea here, in general, is a more radical one, more radical openness to sort of combat some of the problematic aspects, like predatory journals. I mean, if the review is open, doesn't have to. I mean, it could be anonymous, but it's open, so you can follow sort of the research process. It also enables faster sort of take to the market, so you can a researcher controls when he wants to when he wants to publish, and then you can have a review process. And of course, you realize that this is sort of a more controversial or radical change. And it's, as I said, it is not a finalized strategy, and one is actively engaging the research community for feedback. And then, as Gunnar already said, we're working on a strategy for scholarly publishing after 2024, in which a working group has been tasked with assisting the Norwegian institutions in developing a strategy. And this vision is quite long, so you can say one take, if you see the system is sort of not functioning, is okay, we need to develop a new model, better way of doing things, like the suggestion before from Coalition S. And this one perhaps takes more as a starting point, the real existing landscape, and looks at ways to improve it, to sort of combat some of the negative sides and enhance some of the positives. And so the vision is also quite long, and I hope this is the last one, and I'm looking at the colleagues here. But we can read it out. So in the desired future publishing landscape, all researchers have equal access to reading and publishing scientific results. So there's the also the more egalitarian part of it. So all scientific findings are openly shared without delay through reputable publishing channels and are widely accessible to business interest groups and the public. Publishing channels and services are of high quality, ensuring immediate open access to research with reasonable costs, reflecting the services provided by the publisher. High quality entails robust scholarly assessment and feedback, adherence to publishing channel procedures, to scholarly standards for accepting research results, preservation of research integrity, and efficient publication processes that effectively support the completion of research. And also we aspire to a diversity of publishing channels under the control of the research community. So that I go back to that again. And I will just sort of list a few of the main recommendations from this work for discussion. So again, the focus here is on quality, and that should also always be the first entrance point. So we encourage processes and tools that contribute to quality in scientific publishing, attempt to challenge the market position of today's mega publishers, support the diamond model, or call it publicly funded, or call it funded, for both existing publishing channels and the development of new infrastructure. Further develop the Norwegian Register of Scientific Published Channels as a sort of a whitelist or a gatekeeper against predatory journals and sort of grey area channels. Contribute to transparent and reasonable pricing models for APC and other payment solutions. So the APC model in this view is not one that we want, that we foresee will be totally abandoned, but it should have strict sort of linked, the cost should be strictly linked to the actual costs of operating it. So price visibility is, of course, and transparency is important. Ensure that researchers are involved in and receive proper training related to all reforms in today's publishing landscape. Work to expand the use of strategies to retain the researcher's rights, the so-called rights retention strategies, which enable researchers to deposit their articles in open repositories while publishing in their preferred channels, which I should say has gotten quite a lot of attention, and also is also internationally, because all the major Norwegian research, or at least many of them, institutions now have adopted policies at an institutional level for this, and we want to look at the possibility for a national, even European version of this. And the transformative agreement could be maintained for a sustained period, but with strict and tailored requirements for transparency, monitoring of journals, actual transition to open access, and costs. Develop new practices for assessing research and researchers through such things as the Agreement for Reforming Research Assessment and NORCAM and DORA. And work towards sustainable funding models for open access and necessary infrastructure. I mean, we could talk about this for a whole seminar, and as I said, we will. So I suggest everybody who's interested to join the launch of the strategy, which will be next Thursday at 8 o'clock. It will be digital, so you can join from wherever you want. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a very interesting line here, which is this. Publishing channels and services are of high quality. That sounds nice, but Marco just showed us that is increasingly not so. And in Norway, up until now, we've had a system where researchers and staff at universities and so on have had an incentive to publish in journals above a certain quality threshold in order to accomplish to get so-called publication points. Now that is no longer the case. But even within that system, for example, when I cite papers, I don't check the quality always of the the publisher. I cite. So there's a whole market out there of publications that may be produced within a rather doubtful, as Marco was into, doubtful quality production system, so to speak. So related to that is, I was thinking, is the world publishing too much? Is this growth only a good thing? Apparently not. But one thing that kind of contradicts it a little bit is that someone told me yesterday that in the last 10 years, China has achieved 1 million more scientists. And they need to publish, have venues to publish. So it's a bit of a contradiction there. There are increasingly more researchers globally, but the growth in the venues where they can publish has probably increased even more. So some kind of tensions. Marco, are you willing to comment on a question as simple as this? Are we publishing too much, and should we try to get the volume of scientific papers down?
Shall I stay here or shall I come?
Well, for the microphone's sake, you might come up here.
Well, I think that the incentive should be as neutral as possible. That's my perspective. I mean, we shouldn't have a system that too much interfere with the self-regulation of science. So, curbing productivity or pushing productivity, I'm not sure it's really going to work. I think that in the scientific system and in many other organizational contexts, the crucial step is when you select people. So if you select motivated, excellent people, you can expect that they are going to do their best to do a good work. If you have a poor system that doesn't attract talent, that attract only specific type of people, then you will have a problem. So my logic is different. You can try to squeeze a scientist. You will get more articles from this generation of scientists. But the next generation will say, I'm going to do a different work. The academic job was interesting because you were independent, you were not overloaded by bureaucracy, you were able to establish collaboration, as most of us still do, with partners outside, and so forth and so forth. We could choose our topics. If we have a system that says, now we have to make them run more, and we introduce a certain metrics, it might become an unattractive job. In some system where I see that these processes gone very far, they really struggle to get even PhD students, because it's not a good job anymore. So we need to think in a different way in this respect. What I can share an anecdote regarding this quantity quality. My father is a chemist, and he recalls once of a student asking to another colleague, "Oh, should I use this reference?" And the response was, "But is this published before 2000?" And I said, "Yes." "Okay, then you can trust. You can use it." We have a huge problem of replicability. Huge problem. When private companies try to replicate experiments done in the academic, very often they cannot reply. But so at the same time we are telling we need to have a lot much more. No, we need maybe to have very, very selective output from the academic, very valid, because if we produce 100 but 50% is not reliable, the trust in science is going to decline. Maybe it's better to have 60, but you can trust 50. Trust is essential. I stopped to rely on certain scientific findings. I used to read books of, you know, a lot of reference to scientific works. And now I start in social psychology, for example, where there has been a lot of scandals. Before I was, interesting. And now I read and say, I don't know if I can trust this anymore. And that's a sad step. When you start to be, I mean, we should be skeptical as scientists. That's our job. But at some point, we need also to say, okay, interesting, a solid way. But now it's, you know, there's Swiss cheese with a lot of holes. So what do you do? That's my opinion.
Thanks, Marco. Is anyone would like to ask questions or have comments to Marco or to Dag or to Gunnar or to Espen? Now is the time, I think. Yes. Yeah, that would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Camilla Serkansen. I'm the director of the Center for Advanced Study in Oslo. And I've also been, I guess I still am technically speaking, but the head of the board, portfolio board of Humanities and Social Science in the Research Council. So I, first of all, thank you for very nice and interesting presentations. I think some of these results were quite predictable. It's sad, but sometimes you're right and you would hope to be wrong, but okay, but that's another thing. I was thinking about one problem that hasn't been raised, and at least in Norway there is a discussion about scientific books that are also for the larger public. And especially in the humanities, so in history, for instance, this is a problem. How should we deal with open access? So this is for the Research Council.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk about it, but we do have, as you know, an open access policy on research books, newly now since last year. But this is, I know that this is a topic that is sort of being discussed, and one are trying to find solution that works for sort of outside. But there is, I think we'll just say that it's a good question and one that needs to be reflected on, because of course the business model or the sort of is very much different. But I'm not sure I have a good answer, except of course to refer to our own policy, but that's very small when talking about open access books. Gunnar?
I have a solution.
Of course.
So, I'll be very short. So, the policy of the Research Council has to respect that academics are also writing within what we call the literary institution in Norway, where we communicate ideas in books, and people go to bookstores and they go to libraries to take part in that literary institution. And then there are some monographs or books from the humanities that are the end result of a particular research project that needs to be published or perhaps communicated internationally. It's communication among specialists. I think the idea of promoting open access for those books, which gets much more wider attention, is good. But then you have to distinguish them, because as academics we also communicate in other areas. So you cannot have 100% requirement. You should specify that the requirement is attached to research projects and how they and their immediate end result in a publication. You cannot require that the same researcher is open access in all directions.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Torbjørn Moum. I've published for more than 50 years. I've been a professor mostly at the medical faculty in Oslo, Norway, and I've been an author, an editor, co-editor, and a referee at various points And a couple of things, very, very nice presentations, a couple of things that worry me. And because I've seen this change coming, and today I get 4 or 5 requests every day in my mail about being a referee reviewer in journals that I've never heard of, and journals that are only just barely connected to stuff that I've published myself. And they say, we have followed your excellent publications, etc. So I would be a terrible reviewer. I've been I've had several PhD students, 20, 30, and I learned over time that when they want to publish, you shouldn't write this or that because the referee won't understand it. You have to write like so, because so often you find that referees simply don't get the point and they don't master the field. So this has shaped everything. And there are 2 concerns here. And the main one is that we are getting into a situation where there'll be fake news because there are myths that arise. And people publish this stuff and say, oh yes, excellent, that's exactly, and that would be what in Norwegian called politisk correct stuff that people like. And it's not really that much evidence pointing in that direction. The other thing is a recent experience in sociology where some colleagues or people that I know who wanted to publish a very simple twin study pointing to the existence of a strong genetic component in social status. That is, that parents and children are similar, not because the parents have the same, roughly the same education, not because parents influence their children such and such, but because parents and children have the same genes that promote seeking higher education. So there is a correlation, a small one, between parental and child education, but it's due to genes rather than the parents. And this was totally dismissed. This finding, it was a very simple, rough, but exactly what you would expect from previous research that has been going on for a couple of 3 decades in Norway and abroad, showing this particular thing. Norwegian sociologists just said, oops, no, nothing. We don't believe in this. So you can dismiss things that are good or because there is no quality control of your own reading, or you could accept it because there is no quality control on the other side.
Thank you for this comment, and you mentioned something very important that we haven't explicitly talked about today, which is the pressure on the peer review system due to this massive increase in publishing. We're approaching 10 o'clock, but we have time for one more comment or question. Vidar, you were going to say something? Or if anyone has, you are free to go, at 10 o'clock if you want to, but if those who want to stay and listen to more questions, you're more than welcome to do so. So Vidar first, and yes, one more comment after that.
Vidar Røgen, Universities Norway. Just have one comment to Camilla that introduce books as quite important. Espen didn't mention that the Research Council has introduced new criteria for open access publishing also for books, as from 2023, I think. So it's connected to the funding. So if you publish in a book, directly as a result of your funding, you have to publish open access. But of course, the books reported from Norway that are a result of funding from Research Council are very little part of the total amount of the books that we publish. So I think that 80 or 85% of the books are not funded by the Research Council. So in the report, we have addressed this problem. And we call for some kind of funding system also for books that needed publish open access. So this problem is addressed in the report. And I have also a question to Marco. you mentioned, I think, 48% of the fake articles are from certain countries. I think you mentioned India, China, Russia, Turkey. But if you sum up those countries, they also represent half of the world's population. So my question is fake articles an equal large problem in the Western country than those countries? So I didn't understand that point in your presentation. But thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Yes.
Thank you for the question. So, according to the estimation of these people that make this study, of the paper published, for example, from Turkey, approximately 45% of their papers is suspiciously a paper mill. So maybe it wasn't clear, the slide, you know what I mean. It's particularly from these developing countries, which have tremendous pressures for publication. And so there has actually very recent another couple of papers examining similar problems, for example, in country self-citations and e-per publication, authors publishing 60 papers per year. And you see there are approximately 60 papers every year, so it's one per week. And you see the group of countries replicate often across these different dashboards and different proxies of suspicious behavior. So there is a group of developing countries with extreme, policies pushing for publication, citation, and stuff. So you always see the same group of countries. But I can share the paper, of course, later on. Thank you.
Mitt navn Lars Holden. Jeg kommer fra Norsk Regnesentral og my name is Lars Holden. And I'm been the representative of the institute in this here in this group, which will present our results next week. Thank you for nice presentations and nice papers, and I completely agree with the comments, particularly the comment of your last comment and Gunnar's comment on differentiating the work of books. We really need to maintain bookstores. That means that we need to have persons going in and to pay for a book. So that is simple. So we need to differentiate in some way. But my main point here is that it's easy to say that it's published too many papers, but it's no way to reduce the number of papers produced worldwide. That is just not possible. What is possible is to make the good high quality more visible. That is much more easier. So we need to make registry, we make to control over what is high quality and promote the high quality, and then just forget the rest of it. And when we select people, select project, we need to base on the what we consider high quality, and so that new researchers know what is high quality, what they should aim at, and like Marco's comments. So we should focus on what is high quality and just forget the rest, because that is completely out of our influence. Thank you.
It's okay. People can go if they want to, so they want to listen to you.
Well, we'll see. I'm Jorunn Norgard. I'm Chief Advisor at the Norwegian Association of Researchers, and I would just like to thank for a very interesting and important seminar and presentations, and also acknowledge both Marco and the points that also Gunnar made when it comes to really focusing and addressing the work of the researchers, the things that we have seen over the years now, the pressure to change, the pressure to publish, and to really keep and focus on quality and trust in science as crucial. And I also think that we need to, there are so many issues that we haven't even touched upon, like AI. How will this sort of intervene into this very issue, or more about which license do we publish under, at what cost, for instance. But also there's an ongoing work initiated by the government to review the Norwegian research system. And I think that these questions, the whole question about open access, trust in science, financing, funding of science, need to be at the very core of this work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to have a maybe final comment on to explain one issue that has been talked about, and that is the explosion in number of publications and linking this growth to changes in the publication model. And I think it's important to be aware that this growth has been like this for decades. So, and the main factor affecting this growth is the large increase in number of researchers in the world. So as Fredrik mentioned, there is a growth during the 10-15 years of 1 million researchers in China, and also in the European Union, the growth is 200,000 or 300,000 during the 15 years. And of course, these new researchers, we have to allow them to publish. So there's a demand for new journals. There's a demand for more publication channels. So that has been a main explanation of the growth. And if we look at Norway, actually there is no inflation in terms of productivity. There is an increasing number of publications produced per individual. But if you adjust for the increasing share of contribution from foreign researchers, the correlation is more or less perfect. So we don't see that there is this kind of negative effect of the expectations in the Norwegian system. So that was just but of course it's important to also take these other issues into account. But I would just like to emphasize this fact as an important driver in the growth we see, and that has been concerned for decades actually. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dag, and thank you to Marco, who come all the way from Kristiansand here to talk, and to Espen, coming from the Research Council. I think we're going to close the official program now, but the good news is you can watch this again when we put it out on our webpage sometime next week maybe. So thanks a lot for coming, thank you for questions and comments, and first of all, thank you to the presenters today. Thank you.